The Bank of England put out a warning last week where they said, quote, companies must prepare for vulnerable shocks in the economy. Now, I'm based in the United States, but there are three things that I want you to understand about this. And number one, which is what the Bank of England is focused on, is the oil shock because of the escalating conflicts in the Middle East, because energy and oil prices affect every aspect of our business. The second thing I want you to be aware of is the impact of the port shutdowns and how that impacts our supply chain. And number three is the interest rate shock because of all the changes that are happening here. How is that going to impact what the Federal Reserve Bank now does in the future? So let me break this all down, starting with what's happening with oil. But first, here are a few words from my sponsor, Built. If you're like me and you rent where you live, I just found a way to earn points on your rent payments with Built. Rent is expensive, obviously. But now, if you pay your rent through Built, they will reward you with points that you can redeem for an airline ticket, or a hotel, or a workout class, or your next month's rent payment, and a whole lot more. Built is a neighborhood loyalty program that allows you to earn points on rent and around your neighborhood, and there's so much you can do with Built points. They've been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate, and they're designed to fit around your everyday lifestyle. That means you can pay your rent through Built, get rewarded with points, and then you can redeem those points for your favorite hotel. But don't just take my word for it. Try it out for yourself and start earning points right now. You can use my link down in the description below, or you can use this QR code on the screen right here. That way they know that I sent you. Energy, like oil, is the backbone of our economy because everybody needs energy. You need energy to power your home and your car. Businesses need energy to power their operations. And so when oil prices go up, that impacts the price of everything, even your guac, because now corporations have to pay extra money to the truck drivers to pump their gas to deliver the avocados from the farm to the warehouse to the store. So when oil prices go up, the prices of everything go up. And over the last week, we saw oil prices rise. And there are two things that happened last week which triggered the prices of oil to rise. Number one, we saw more conflict in the Middle East. And number two, we saw stimulus in China. So let me break this down starting here. Iran is the third largest oil producer in OPEC. So when you see more wars happening in the Middle East, that can then impact oil supply, which affects oil and gas prices. Now let me make sure this is completely clear. I'm not here to talk geopolitics. I'm here to talk finances so you understand what's happening with your money. That way you can make better investments. So anytime you hear of escalating wars and tensions in the Middle East, I want you to think about how that affects oil prices. And the second thing I want you to understand is the Chinese economy, because the Chinese economy has been struggling for a while now. That's not news. But recently, China just unveiled a brand new stimulus program, which is its largest stimulus since the pandemic. Now, the question you might be wondering is, how does a Chinese stimulus in their economy affect energy prices? Well, the goal with the stimulus is to get the economy moving, to get businesses moving again, which could lead to more oil and energy consumption, which could lead to more demand for energy, which could then impact oil prices. Now, all of this is a very sensitive topic, and it can change very quickly, which means oil prices and energy prices can also change very quickly. That's why we cover this in market briefs every day, but this is also why the Bank of England says that companies need to be prepared for some sort of shock. What is a shock? It's this type of energy shock, because these things can change the prices of oil and energy, which can impact businesses, they can impact the economy, and those changes can happen very quickly, especially when you have a lot of conflicts or changes happening around the world. Now, before I move on to number two, which is the impact of the port shutdowns, I do want to discuss what this means for you, because the reality is I want you to be a financially sophisticated investor. And what every sophisticated investor understands is that uncertainty can create opportunity. But in order for you to capitalize on opportunity, you have to be financially prepared to be able to do so. That means if you're stressed about paying your credit card bills, or if you're stressed about how you're going to eat, you're not going to be able to capitalize on opportunities. So what you need to do is get your money in order, pay off your credit card bills, have some savings, and have cash ready to invest always. Not just because of this, you always want to have that. That way you can capitalize on opportunities, because that's what wealthy people do. They are ready to invest when an opportunity happens, and the average person wants to start preparing after they see an opportunity. I don't want you to be in that boat. So make smarter investment decisions and financial decisions today. That way you have more money to invest when an opportunity arises. And this brings me to point number two, which is the impact of the port closures that we saw start on October 1st, because on October 1st, we saw ports on the east coast of the United States shut down. Now, there's a lot of chatter about how port closures can impact the economy and how long the impact lasts. But instead of guessing, let's take a look at history. In 2002, ports on the West Coast were shut down due to strikes. After 10 days of striking and shutdown, then President Bush used his Taft-Handley Act powers, which let him shut down the strikes. So the question ultimately is, what was the economic impact of the West Coast ports being shut down for 10 days? Well, let's take a look. According to the National Association of Manufacturers, it took, quote, months to recover after the 10-day port shutdown. So the thing you want to pay attention to is not just how long ports are shut down, but how long does it take to get the supply chain back in order after the ports are back open. And according to the Vice President of the National Retail Federation, for each day of the strike, it takes about 3 to 5 days to clear the backlog and resume normal operations. The longer the strike goes, the more it gets compounded. So it's still a little too early to say what, if any, impact these port closures have or will have on prices rising. But the thing you also want to pay attention to is the panic buying that happened in reaction to these port closures, because we also saw people running around Costco trying to stockpile toilet paper, even though a lot of that toilet paper is manufactured in the US and it wasn't really impacted by these port strikes. So you have the port strikes, then you have the consumer reaction. So what is actually going to happen? Well, only time will tell. But that's where you want to pay attention to how this can impact the prices of things. And the reason why that matters is none other than number 3, the interest rate shock factor, because the Federal Reserve Bank is also keeping an eye on the prices of things in regards to what they want to do with interest rates. The next Federal Reserve Bank meeting is scheduled to be November 6th and November 7th, and that's when they are scheduled to announce what they want to do with interest rates next. Now, the Federal Reserve Bank has kind of alluded that they want to cut interest rates again, but maybe not as aggressively as before. But in order for the Federal Reserve Bank to continue cutting interest rates, they don't want to be worried about inflation. And what do they look at when they study and measure inflation? They're looking at the prices of things. And that's why this all starts to come together now, because Wall Street is hoping for more and more aggressive rate cuts, because cutting interest rates can stimulate spending. I mean, it stimulates borrowing, which then can stimulate spending, but that's what Wall Street wants, because that means institutions can borrow money to invest more money. That means that small businesses can borrow more money to grow their businesses. And that means that you can go into debt to finance your extra guac. I don't recommend you do that. But this is why Wall Street is hoping for more and more aggressive interest rate cuts. But there's also the consequence that if you cut interest rates too much, that could also make the inflation problem worse. And that's what the Federal Reserve Bank is wanting to weigh the consequences of cutting interest rates too much versus too little. But then when you have to worry about the prices of things rising due to supply chain constraints, now you can start to see why this would be an issue. Now again, it's too early to say what's going to happen, but this is something now that the Federal Reserve Bank is going to be keeping their eye on. It's something that you probably want to keep your eye on, because all of this information gives uncertainty to the Federal Reserve Bank. And of course, one thing that Wall Street does not like is uncertainty. Now, of course, we'll be keeping you posted on market briefs, but this is why I want you to be aware of what's happening and not get driven into the panic-driven state that many people get into. I don't want you to be a trader. I want you to be an investor. And anytime we start to see more uncertainty or more shocks, that creates more panic up and down. And I want you to remember to stay calm, because that's where you can find the most opportunity. We just entered the next phase of the global economy. The Federal Reserve Bank is now cutting interest rates. Canada is cutting interest rates. China is now cutting rates, and countries across Europe are also cutting interest rates. And we've also seen some countries now start to protect themselves against any sort of potential economic uncertainty by buying things like precious metals.